Hi, welcome to the second part of our seminar this week. We covered sort of Donna Haraway and her thinkings about the utopic and dystopic sort of potentials of new media and how the cyborg, the female cyborg in particular, might be of interest to us and helpful to us in our thinking about new technology. The other sort of ideas I want to discuss this week come from a scholar named Jody Dean, who is interested in how technology breaks down barriers and boundaries in similar ways to Haraway, but slightly different. She's specifically interested in the enormous amount of criticism that selfies attract. Scholarly articles, news reports, parents and teachers and neighbors are all in our ears about how selfies erode our self-esteem, sexualize, and contribute to a culture of peer pressure. And I'm sure these voices are kind of ringing in your head right now. Some of you might agree on these readings of selfie culture that they're kind of damaging to us. I myself have fallen into this way of thinking when I see young people more absorbed in images of themselves than the world around them. And the kind of a recent anecdote that comes to mind, not selfies specifically, but in terms of self-image, was I was in the Mickey building over the break, and so there were sort of people in graduation gowns taking pictures of themselves, and I saw a couple sort of posing in front of Forgan Smith, and one girl was in her kind of graduation outfit, and the other kind of dude was sort of taking a video, I presume for TikTok, of her kind of twirling around in her graduation robe and sort of watching all the sort of graduates around campus. It seems to be this was a highly coveted sort of piece of media to kind of make about yourself, of yourself twirling in kind of graduation gear, which is a kind of a weird thing in and of itself that I think is sort of shaped by TikTok. So you can kind of go off in a tangent about how, media sort of shapes our behavior in weird ways. But, they spent half an hour, and I kind of like checked back in on them through work, half an hour getting this one 2-second video, and they would she would twirl, and then they would kind of reconvene and look at the video and sort of talk about it, and then she would go back into kind of position and twirl again, and I was just like, oh my god, this is insane. Just take the video and upload it. It doesn't really matter. It all looks the same. And how is that actually capturing your experience of graduation? So I got really old lady grumpy about it. Tangent, but I think relevant. And I think there's a potential to think about the way that young people use social media as sort of, you could make the argument that their interest in life is contingent upon seeing themselves in the frame. But I know that this is a knee-jerk response, and Jody Dean would think this is a knee-jerk kind of misguided response, and she models a slightly different way of thinking about selfies. And in particular, she argues for the recuperating potential of selfie culture and sort of self-representation in social media. She argues that rather than focusing on each individual photograph and video and the harmful effects of selfie culture specifically, we need to take them as a collective in order to really figure out what they're doing. So selfies are quick registrations of what we are doing. They are the right nows, and they follow a very similar format. They don't necessarily function to say, look at how hot I am, or I'm here right now. Look at how hot I am, look at how popular I am. But more, they function to say, I'm here right now, so where are you? She argues, really interestingly, that selfies are not about the individual and meism, but they are more about fitting into and engaging with a collective. They are more statements along the lines of, I'm following this formula to communicate with people. What do you think? the circulation of the selfie becomes an end in and of itself as production, reproduction, and distribution converge. What does this mean? So in other words, in prior eras, these phases were very separate. So if you were making a film in the 1950s, say, you would make it, production, you would then process it and reproduce it, reproduction, and then you would give it to distributors around the country and internationally to show it in their theaters, distribution. So selfie culture collapses all of these states into the same device. So you can make an image of yourself, production, you can reproduce that image across various platforms, reproduction, and then you could broadcast that image, distribution. And this sort of collapsing of these various phases is unique to the digital era, she would argue. Selfie formats are dictated by multiplicity, repetition, and association. So what is this saying? It's saying that the selfies you take are taken in multiples, they are repetitive in their formats, and you take them to connect with others. So not selfie necessarily, but self-representation. Going back to that courtyard anecdote that I was so grumpy about, is taken in multiples. So they worked hard to kind of get this image over half an hour. They are repetitive in their formats, meaning everyone was kind of going after this image of twirling in their graduation gowns, and they are taken to connect with others. So Dean would argue that that video is less about that person individually and more about how she is trying to kind of engage in the collective identity and the collective feeling of connection. So perhaps text messages have more in common with selfies than photographs because they are focused on sending a message, on communication. Selfies are not reducible to a single image. They are expressions of relationality. If you look at the last selfie you took, and I would encourage you to do this right now, so I'll pause and I'll let you get out your phones to look at your last selfie. You doing it? You doing it? You should be doing it. Do it. Okay. Did it. Good. So ask yourself, whom were you trying to connect with? And what were you saying with that image? These are the questions we should be asking. What formula and formats were you following in order to connect with people? Those are the questions we should be asking, not how does this subscribe to peer pressure about sort of standards of beauty, how is this sort of narcissistic in sort of like broadcasting self-interest and meism. Those are the questions we shouldn't really be concerned with, according to Jody Dean. On the one hand, these images are highly social and mutable forms of self-expression. On the perhaps devil's advocate side of things, selfies might be sending a message that you are reproducible in and of yourself. And that might be sort of damaging. But on the whole, Jody Dean is pretty, I wouldn't say maybe utopic, but pretty positive about the impact of this form of self-representation upon sort of youth today. So on the whole, selfies are products for how our self-understanding has altered with technology and how previous conceptions of the self might be mediated through technology at hand. And in some respect, they are dazzling in similar ways that sort of make us think of the utopic potentials of the sun machines that Haraway kind of talks about. Are selfies a part of Haraway's cyborg feminism, we might ask? Maybe. I don't know. Do they blur the boundaries between human and machine in similar ways, between the sort of invisible and visible aspects of technology might be worth asking. So of course, just to sort of apropos of what we've been discussing this week, as I've been filming this on my phone, and as I've been filming this, I've been sort of checking to my left where I usually keep my phone on my working desk, and thinking like, oh, where's my phone? Where did my phone go? And and I was like, I'm filming it on my phone. My phone's right there. But I think that this speaks to kind of how bodily these devices can be, these sun machines can be. Like like my phone is so much a part of me that I know that it's to my left at all kind of points in time, and it's kind of an extension of the left side of my body in a truly cyborgian way that might be kind of, you might kind of think of this as kind of just, wow, this is pretty stupid, and this is the product of our digital age, that we're kind of so attached to our phones that we literally need to track them at all points of time. But I guess Haraway would argue perhaps this is kind of cool. Perhaps it's cool to kind of have this sort of mechanical and digital and amazingly powerful device sort of attached to my left arm at all points in time. How might that power be harnessed for good and for kind of empowering me? So just a little aside as we've been sort of filming this. Thinking about Jodi Dean's ideas about self-representation and how they might be really positive, and they might sort of look at the way we connect to others in revolutionary ways. There's always going to be a criticism of this, right? And maybe one might be offered by Chris Schilling, who's actually writing in 1994, which predates Jodi Dean. However, I think his sort of ideas might apply, of a criticism you could land against her arguments. And he wrote that this growing investment in the body as constitutive of self-identity is symptomatic of the decline of transpersonal meaning structures, such as those offered by religion or by grand political narratives. Okay, so what does this mean? In other words, our body-obsessed culture is the result of an absence of greater stories and myths that we can tell about ourselves. In talking about cosmetic surgery as a sort of technical intrusion on the body, perhaps in the same way that we can think of filters, he writes, for many, the surgical refashioning of their bodies becomes a never-ending process as they engage in an impossible search for an identity that is forever beyond reach. So how might we think of sort of of social media filters and sort of that idea of augmented reality of ourselves? How might we think of this as really damaging, as sort of an ever hungry, never sated sort of need for us to alter ourselves in pursuit of some kind of ideal version of ourselves that is impossible, that we're never going to kind of attain. I guess that's what Chris Schilling would say. And he continues, while the notion of the organic/natural body untainted by technology is untenable, so too is the notion of the cyborg, where the distinction between the human and the machine is effaced. So he's warning us of embracing the cyborg a little too readily as a liberating figure. The more technology intrudes into our lives, the more body obsessed we become, then the more bereft of stories we become that really tell us something about ourselves above and beyond reflections of us and ourselves. So let me rephrase that. So the more that technology becomes really interlocked with our bodies, and the more body obsessed we are, we lose sort of these more meaningful, deeper social narratives about ourselves as a collective, and not as sort of individuals that are obsessed with our kind of empty self-image. So this is quite at odds with what Haraway and Jody Dean are saying. So I guess they're kind of three sort of approaches to new technology that are modeled in this week. One is Haraway, one is Jody Dean, one is this guy, Chris Schilling. Chris Schilling is on the more dystopic side of things. Jody Dean is on the more utopic side of things. And then Haraway sits somewhere in the middle. And I wonder which idea you think is most convincing. What do you respond most to in terms of everyone's ideas of how we're using new technologies? And in particular, we've kind of focused on the potential sort of liberating capacities and damaging capacities of smartphones in this seminar. So I'm looking forward to what you think. There's another reading coming up this week about sort of utopic potentials that actually goes back to the beginnings of the movie camera and how people kind of celebrated it as an extension of their bodies. It's a little bit of a trippy reading by a guy named Dziga Vertov, who was writing at the time of the Russian Revolution of 1918 and sort of celebrating the camera's potentials for actually kind of building a sort of national identity after the cataclysmic sort of effects of the 1918 revolution. So he was interested in sort of the camera's revolutionary potential, its potential to connect people, very similar to ways people are thinking. Some people are thinking about smartphone technology now. So his stuff is incredibly it's almost like in the form of a poem. It's like a poem manifesto about the potentials of the camera. So it's a little trippy, but kind of just roll with it and see what you think. Okay.